Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to the Toyota Bz4x, the first electric car in the current times from Toyota. Now, if you're not familiar, Toyota actually did have another electric car, the RAV4 EV, which you probably never heard of because a very good reason. It's not a very good one. This one, however, is supposed to be the future. Unfortunately, I have some news. We're going to explore this car and take a look at it, see what's good and what's not good about it, but things are interesting. Let's put it this way. Let's get started and we'll see why. Let's start our technical review under the hood. And electric cars, let's talk a little bit about that. Electric car recipe is simple but complicated. Let's talk about the simple part. Giant battery, usually at the bottom of the car, because you have a flat floor and you can put a giant battery there. Electric motor, you supply power to the motor, it spins the front wheels, we get going, you reverse that power to the motor, it spins the other way, we go in reverse. Simple as that, have a nice day. The complicated part is managing all this, and the biggest thing about it, and it is in my opinion, that this is how electric car systems are kind of graded, is their thermal management system. Because here is the problem with electric cars. This has a giant lithium-ion battery. Lithium-ion batteries are very tricky things. You can't run them too hot, you can't run them too cold. They have to be in a perfect temperature. And managing that is where the complication of electric cars is. Not really the battery or driving the wheels and all that. That's pretty simple. The thermal management system in this car is not the greatest. It feels very rudimentary and experimental. And let's dive into it and we'll talk a little bit about it. So this car has two cooling systems. One of them for the motors and inverters, one of them for the battery. So the motor has an inverter that is built into it, and it's kind of a two-piece deal. The inverter is what takes the power out of the battery, sends it to the motor, and then when the motor starts regenerating, it flips and starts charging the battery. At the same time, it sends power to the AC compressor. It changes that voltage from the high voltage to 12 volts, so you can charge your 12-volt battery, because this car still have a 12-volt battery, proudly sits right under the hood. Power all electronics and everything, and also when you plug it in to charge, that's what's going to monitor the battery, send power to it to charge it. What charging? Are we charging a DC fast charging or regular 110 charging, which by the way on this car takes 42 hours when we plugged it in. But the real magic happens is with the second cooling system, which by the way, the first cooling system takes Toyota regular pink coolant, very used in every single gasoline car from right around 2004 all the way to today. The second coolant, which is the one for the battery, is a new special coolant. It is orange. It reminds me of GM's Dexcool color, and it is a low conductivity coolant. I don't know why they love to do this. Why don't we just use the same coolant? Probably save them a couple of cents. I understand that, but I wish there was the same coolant, low conductivity everywhere, and makes service much easier, much more simple. And before we dive into it, we have to talk about the HVAC system because they're all intermixed, because the HVAC system actually helps with the cooling of the battery. So this car has an electric compressor, which is driven by the high voltage battery. Pretty simple. We've seen that in hybrids for many, many years. There's nothing really special about it. The HVAC system in this is a heat pump system, very similar to that of the RAV4 Prime, with some modifications. The biggest thing about this modification is the cross between the coolant and the refrigerant. Let's talk about it more so you can start to see how this thermal management system works. So let's run some scenarios, and these systems will operate by modes. We'll run a few scenarios so you can see. If the battery is too hot, an electric water pump is going to send battery coolant that is cooled via a radiator in the front, which has a coolant fan. It's going to send it to the battery, run through the battery, cool it, and then come back. The hot coolant will come back, cool on the radiator, and the cycle returns. If the battery gets too hot, even with just the coolant running, and the coolant needs some help, there is a battery chiller What that does is it runs cold refrigerant through that little battery chiller. That cold refrigerant will cool the coolant, and then that very cold coolant now will go and cool the battery. Pretty simple. Basically, sounds groundbreaking. It's every single electric car does that. It's nothing really groundbreaking. But then the real problems for electric cars come when we have cold temperature. And this is the biggest thing with electric cars, is how they manage their temperatures when it's very cold, when you actually need to warm up that battery and the cabin, of course. So this is where this starts to fall off. When the battery is cold, there is absolutely no attempt to do anything with the coolant or trying to intermix the two cooling system, nothing. It will literally turn on the heater that will warm up the coolant, send it to the battery to warm it up, and we call it a day. Some folks will say, well, that doesn't sound so bad. That's why the range is terrible in any cold weather, because you turned on an electric heater that is completely counterproductive. It just uses so much power out of the battery, it kills your range. That's the first problem. The second problem, to warm up the cabin, and this is where things, initially, the heat pump system is very efficient. Heat pump, by the way, folks, in a few seconds here, it takes the normal AC system and flips it. Hot side becomes inside, cold side outside. But this does it a little bit different. It warms up the coolant, which then goes inside and warms up the cabin. That's fine. That's not a problem. But here's where the problem is. This brilliant heat pump system works very well up to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Below that, we turn on another heater, which warms up the coolant, which generates heat for the inside. There was absolutely no effort to make this, squeeze the limits of the thermodynamics laws and all that. Nothing. This does have a 5-way coolant valve, which sounds very fancy, but I don't even know why we have that, because it doesn't do much. And this is where this system truly shines at becoming the top 10 worst systems. It just feels experimental. Components are super large and unnecessarily large, and there is these voids everywhere, and I feel like they could have spent a lot more time to make this a lot better. You look at companies like Tesla. I mean, their system is so compact and so well thought out. I mean, they squeeze every bit of heat to not use electric heaters. This just went easy way out. There's many other companies that do this so much better, but this one is not it. And that's very unfortunate about this system. But where things get a lot worse, okay, so the system is not the most efficient. If you live in normal climate, maybe it's not so bad, right? Actually, that's not the case, because for reasons beyond me, they went so conservative with the battery management system that it will not allow you to really fast charge this battery. So charging times are agonizing slow. I mean, we reviewed Hyundais that could charge up from 10% to 80% in 18 minutes. Not something you recommend to do every day, but hey, if you need to, you can. Well, this one takes an eternity to charge, even at high voltage. That is not very good. That's the exact reason why electric cars wouldn't work. But yet every other company can do that. Why couldn't they do that? They went way too conservative with the battery management. In order to make the battery last long, you have a very short range. And the biggest problem with that, because of the limitations of how the thermal management is, you turn on the HVAC in this car, you will immediately see your range drop 1/3. And if it's really cold, we've tested it in a few days that were cold here, it almost drops in half. Every electric car will drop its range a little bit. You'll drop a few miles here and there, you'll notice it. But this, it's a dramatic drop. You start laughing, it's like, what happened here? And then the range is very unpredictable, and it feels like a beta. It feels like a prototype testing, where it doesn't feel like a complete product. And it takes your range and anxiety to the next level. I really think they could have done a lot better here, and things feel very rudimentary in their kind of beta testing phases. They could do a lot better here, in my opinion. Now, after all this, if you are still interested in this car, it does come in two configurations. Front wheel drive, like this one. Basically, you have a motor in the front, inverter, and everything else. There is an all-wheel drive model, which basically takes this, copies and pastes it in the back, and now you have all-wheel drive. There's no drive shaft, there's none of that. Don't expect miracles, because this car, the advertised range, you will see it if you're in perfect conditions with no HVAC on. You will see the actual range, but as soon as you turn on the HVAC, that range is not the case. That's the unfortunate truth about this system. It's just simply not good. Let's take a look underneath the Bz4x. And of course, everything's covered up. This is the norm with electric cars. They like to make the bottom completely flat, so you have the most aerodynamic and the least drag, so you can have the most range, although this car and range don't get along. Let's start with the front suspension here and the brakes. 2-piston caliper here. Pretty much a little bit on the bigger size of brakes for a car that uses a lot of regen braking, but that's what they went with. Steel control arm at the bottom with a separate ball joint. This is a very similar design, familiar design with Toyota. Steel knuckle, this is the interesting thing. I mean, this is an electric car. The less weight you have, the better range you have, but they went still with a steel knuckle, which from a mechanic's perspective, this is a good thing. Very beefy axle. Of course, electric cars have a lot of torque, so they do need stronger axle. McPherson setup in the front, and something very, very long and skinny sway bar link. Not a problem. It's just I thought I'd mention it's an interesting looking one. Then we move back here, and the battery. Something about electric cars and batteries, they usually leave voids where water and debris can get on top of the battery, and it just kind of collects there and cause all kinds of issues. This one, it's covered up here well. This is actually not an opening, because this is not the battery. This is the battery. And the same thing on this side. They have it pretty well covered up, and I like that. And you have this kind of outer structure. This is where actually the lift points are on. It's separate than the battery, so you can actually lift the car and then lower the battery 6 bolts, 3 bolts on each side, and the battery comes down. Very heavy duty, and this is, you could tell this is a Toyota. They do finish their cars well, and I see it here as well. Everything is solid, everything is heavy duty, and that is something they've done always. Then we move to the back. Now this particular model is a 2-wheel drive model, so it's just front. The rears, if you had a model that is all-wheel drive, on top of this would be the rear motor and the inverter and everything, and then you would have an axle. You notice here, we do not have an axle. Speaking, while we are here, this is the rear suspension. Very familiar rear suspension from Toyota. Trailing arm, few arms, most of them are steel. The knuckle here is aluminum, and of course this has electronic parking brake. See the actuator right here if we wrap around. That's the actuator for that rear parking brake. I think this is a much better design. Things are completely covered up, because when the wheels are on the ground, this control arm actually comes up and makes everything completely flat. And that's something you will see in basically every single electric car today. Let's take a look at the outside of the Bz4x. And this is where I'm a little bit mixed. It doesn't look too bad, but the electric car part is what makes it look bad. I think if this has a normal grille, it kind of resembles the new Prius, which I think looks pretty good. I think the top part looks decent for what it is. I mean, it's not a thrilling car. It is an everyday car. They do have the black cladding. Of course, we had to make a electric car look strange. And then this is something that Toyota is doing new. They're moving their badging in the front. So the radar sensor is right here, but the badge now is at the top. And this is kind of the new design language of Toyota. They're making a flat part here, and then it kind of falls. I like it. It's very objective, but I think it's kind of something different and giving them an image, not just every car has a random look. Notice here we have a little vent for aerodynamics, not for brakes. This is kind of an open vent. Then we look at the wheel and the wheel arch. It's black and it has this very interesting shape. I don't know what's with Toyota lately, and the different colors. And this is where my small objection is. This is the body color. This is not, but this is kind of a gloss paint. And then the bottom are not gloss. I wish even both of them were not, or both were gloss. That would be even nicer. But this is not a fully optioned one, so there is room for improvement. The tires are surprisingly huge for this car, which makes the ride actually pretty, it's not bad. It's actually pretty comfortable, and that's one of the good things about this car. These are hubcaps with an aluminum wheel behind them. This is, again, not a high-spec car. Then we come to the charge port, which is in the front. I like that it's in the front. I wish it was all the way in the front, like Hyundai that does it like that. But this is better than being in the back. But here's my problem with it. You open it up. I like that these are kind of not a cover that you pull and it dangles down. I like that they're, you know, something a little nicer. But what is not nice is, I mean, look when I move this. The whole fender starts moving. I wish this was a little bit better quality. I mean, this feels so cheap, it's ready to fall off. And this is the same thing they did with the RAV4 Prime. The door was very flimsy where you charge it. This is a door you're going to use all the time, especially in this electric car. That's where you charge it, and you're going to have to deal with this flimsy door all the time. The side profile doesn't have a lot going on. You do have this interesting line that comes down, kind of disappears, and this other line comes down and goes up. I mean, there's not a lot going on, but if it didn't have these lines, it would have been okay as well. The mirror is black, not the body color. That's okay. This has smart key only in the front, not in the back. And there's something very, very interesting about this. And this is where Toyota is kind of moving, following trends, and trying to catch up their car with technology. So if I get the key, here's the typical scenario. You're a family man, your kids are in the car, finally you got your kids to open their door on their own and close it. Your kid is still getting out of the car, especially on that side, and you're trying to go greet them, but you want to lock the door, and by the time they close the door, it locks. Every single other manufacturer almost, when you lock this, it will lock, and then you close the door, it's already locked and we're done. Toyota does this. They all do that, and it's super annoying. You have to close all the doors, and then it will lock. That's fine. It's not the end of the world. But they actually fixed this, but half fixed it. Because I'm going to leave this door open, and so I unlock it. I'll leave this door. If you actually take the key out of your pocket and hit lock, it's actually locked. So, wait a minute. We did this very nice feature, but we half did it, which makes the smart key completely redundant. I don't know why they skipped this. This is a total oversight on this. I wish they would have done it all the way where you can lock it from here and it would do the same thing, but they didn't, and that's okay. Then we move to the back, and this is where this particular shape has been a thing with Toyota. This is one of their design language. It somewhat resembles the Supra, also has that similar design. The Sienna does. It's an interesting look. And this curved glass, probably for aerodynamic, it really robs from your space in the back. Gives this a little bit of an interesting shape, like kind of an interesting profile. Is it an SUV? Is it a hatchback? Is it just a interesting looking thing? But the space in the back, it's actually a pretty decent space, except because of this slant, it takes a lot of your storage space, and that is the issue with this. You do not have a spare tire, you do have a little storage space here. Nothing here, because the floor is actually very high, because that's where the rear motor would go if you had an all-wheel drive model. No, this particular one doesn't have the power closing door. The tail light I do like. It's a bar light that goes across. I like that they did not fill this with all kinds of badging. It just says Toyota here, Bz4x. That's it. It doesn't need to say electric car, whatever. They just kept it simple. Bz4x, that's all you need to know. And that is good. And just like more modern cars, there's no bumper. You hit anything here, it's going to hit this door, and we have damage to the door. This is something I'm seeing across the whole automotive industry. They're just getting rid of the bumper. So you got to be careful with these. Let's take a look at the interior of the Bz4X. And this is where I feel like things get a little better, in a way. So the interior of this car is actually, it's a pretty comfortable, typical Toyota interior. There's no fuss, there's no over-the-top things. It's a pretty comfortable interior, pretty simple to operate. It doesn't feel like a spaceship electric car interior. It just feels like a normal Toyota interior with a few special spaceship touches, like the complete lack of a glove box for reasons unknown to us. I don't know why this car doesn't have a glove box, but it doesn't. And then the material on the dash is a strange cloth-like, not cloth-like. It just looks not very good. I wish this would have just had a plastic slab for a dash. Would have been perfectly fine, and nobody would have complained. Because otherwise, this interior, it's roomy, it's comfortable. This car is actually pretty quiet because of these big tires that we talked about. It actually absorbs bumps pretty well, and it won't disappoint you as an interior. Few things about it though. The shifter is a strange shifter. I guess they couldn't just stick the regular Prius shifter that they're putting in everything right now. They had to make one unique to the electric one. Then you do have the kind of one pedal driving-ish, which doesn't work very well. It is a button. There's no modes of it or whatnot. You just have one button. You press it. You have it. Doesn't completely bring the car to a complete stop, but there is that. Then there is the gauge, which is the same thing with the Prius, the new Prius, but it actually took it from this one. So the gauge is this little screen that's hovering in front of you. No matter where you put your steering wheel in a safe and comfortable position, it just blocks half the screen. That is not a great idea. I wish they would have not done that and just made it normal. If anything, they could have just copied the interior from the Corolla Cross, put it here. Would have been perfectly fine as well. Nobody would have complained, but they didn't. But something about this interior, a few interesting things. The HVAC controls, they're not exactly a button, but some of the operations are button, but the rest are displayed on this little screen. The infotainment screen is pretty big, and it is the latest infotainment screen from Toyota. Works pretty good, does have a lot of customizations. Glitchy, and does have the over-the-air updates, although they don't work very well. Underneath this kind of floating center console, you do have some storage, which something kind of reminds me of a Prius. That is one of the good functionalities about it. Folks, from a driving standpoint, this car is just like every other electric car. It zips around, it feels pretty fast because it does not have the lag and the torque curve of a gasoline engine. It has instant torque. So it does feel it's pretty zippy. It's not the fastest electric car in the world, but I think for what it is, it drives very well. It's pretty quiet. There's no engine. The interior, one thing has to be said, and this is credit to Toyota and their other cars as well, not just this one. It is a very basic interior that does not give you a headache to operate. It's very simple, other than the gauge and the lack of the glove box and the weird materials on the dash. It's actually not a bad interior. I really, from the bottom of my heart, wish they would have spent more time working on this electric system, because this wouldn't actually have been a bad car. But that wildly variable range really puts this car down and kind of takes all the nice things and the good things about it out of the window. Let's talk about the back seat of the Bz4X. This is my driving position. I'm 5'7". This is actually a pretty roomy back seat. Truth have to be said, this is very nice, and it doesn't have a hump in the middle. I feel like this could really work for families, but again, we go back to the main thing with this car. The electric range and the whole electric system could use a lot of work. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the Bz4X. And because there is so much I don't like about this, let's start with what I do like about it. Because, yeah, I would love me a hybrid version of this car. But wait, don't they make the Corolla Cross Hybrid, which is exactly the same size? And yeah, that's the problem with this car. As an electric car, it is probably the top 10 worst electric cars. And the reason for that, not because Toyota can't figure out to make an electric car. I mean, remember, they put the hybrid car on the map. They know a thing or two about cars with electricity. But they're just simply not interested in it, to their own saying. But the problem is, why come out with a car that is experimental, that is meant to do a marketing checkbox? That's all this is meant to do. It is really not a good electric car. It feels rudimentary, feels experimental. You look at tech under the hood and things, how things are made. They did not do much with it. They just took an hybrid car and they've, plucked out the engine and let's figure out the rest and let's go from there. They could have done a lot better. And when you look at something like the new Prius and the new Prius Prime, the technology that they have there, they're groundbreaking for hybrid cars. This is not groundbreaking. Toyota, you could do so much better. But the problem is you won't because you're simply not interested. You don't see it. And that's the problem. Why make a car when you're not interested in that specific market? That's the biggest problem with this car. It's simply not a good electric car. And you have cars within the Toyota lineup that are the same price, they're a lot better, they function a lot better, like the RAV4 Prime. You kind of get the best of both worlds. It's well made, it's functional, and it's a much better choice for that price range than this will ever be. So should you buy a Toyota RAV4 Prime? And no, that is not a mistake. I think you should over this. Folks, this car is kind of a marketing checkbox. We made an electric car. Here it is. We don't really care about it. We didn't really spend too much time on it, but we have one in case, just so we can check that box. We are into the electric car race. Because as an electric car, this is probably one of the worst electric cars we have tested so far. The biggest problem with this, from a consumer standpoint, let's leave the tech out of it for a second. From a consumer standpoint, the range is not good. The charging time is not good. I mean, the range is so inconsistent that it makes your range anxiety, which is the thing with electric cars, go on overdrive. And the range to begin with is not good. And then when you turn on the HVAC, it just gets cut 1/3. And if you're really in cold weather, it gets almost half. I've never seen an electric car that is this not good. There is no other way to say it. This is really not a good electric car. The truth has to be said. And if you're spending money in this range, price range, this one as tested is $44,000. That puts you right around a RAV4 Prime, which is so much more superior to this. Reliable, well-made, same, everything that is good about this car is good in the RAV4 Prime. You still have that E-range, but it does have a gasoline engine and it works great. That is the God honest truth, folks. Now, this car, if you must have a Toyota electric car and you are okay with the very, very variable and inconsistent range, as a car, interior, exterior, living functionality-wise, it's actually not a bad car, but same can be said about any other Toyota model. The closest thing to this car in the Toyota lineup is probably a Corolla Cross. If I were you and I was looking for a electrified car, if you would, and you must stay with Toyota for the reliability and build quality, skip this, go with the RAV4 Prime. You will be very, very happy. Because I feel like Toyota led the charge on hybrid cars and even plug-in hybrids. They really got it right, and everybody kind of followed them later. They did not do that with electric cars, not even close. Tesla led the charge for that. They do that very well, although the rest of their car is not great. But this is not a good electric car to compare. I feel like this car was completely unnecessary. I understand what Toyota is trying to do. They're trying to say, we're not interested in electric cars. We don't think they are the way forward. And that's fine. Everybody has their opinions. Electric cars work. There's many examples that we've tested that work. They do have their issues. You didn't have to come out with a car just to check off some marketing checkbox to say, we have an electric car. You could have just skipped over the whole thing and just hold on to that theory of, we don't think electric cars work. That's why we make very good hybrids, very good plug-in hybrids, and we're going to stick to it. So this is a message for Toyota. You could do a lot better than this. This is simply not a good electric car. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.